everybody, to the Friday Night Conversations. Our special guest tonight is Nora Ashleigh Barrie. She is a survivor of the troubled teen industry, and she currently does activism work regarding survivors of the troubled teen industry. And she is a project manager and graphic designer for the Surviving Abuse podcast. Welcome, Nora, to Friday Night Conversations.
Thank you.
So glad to have you. So you currently live in Utah with your husband, 2 dogs, and 2 kids, right?
Yeah, I do. We moved here about 5 years ago. I've kind of lived all over the country, but it's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah. And you're a college student studying psychology?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm at Salt Lake Community College, which I've been really impressed with. I've been really happy with the education I'm getting.
Good. And you are a survivor of the troubled teen industry. And most people probably don't know what that term means. So can you talk about that a little bit and just tell us overall what that means, first of all?
Yeah, I can. So the troubled teen industry is a collection of residential treatment centers for kids that include, traditional residential treatment centers, but also therapeutic boarding schools, wilderness programs, all kinds of any kind of residential treatment for kids that does not fall under a psych ward or a foster or group home pretty much falls under the troubled teen industry.
So in your own experience, let's see, you had, see on your website, you had experienced adoption trauma. Tell us about that.
So I was adopted pretty much at birth. My mom knew beforehand, before I was born, that she was putting me up for adoption. And so when I was born, she never held me. I was handed directly to the representatives from the adoption agency, taken across state lines, and then moved between 7 different foster homes in 3 weeks before I was actually adopted.
Wow. Yeah, I think I saw on your website that one of your parents was a narcissist.
Yeah, that's my adoptive father.
Now, what was that like living with him?
He was always very critical, very judgmental, expected perfection. And that's actually a big part of where a lot of my the behavior that got me sent away to the TTI came from. Is just trying to manage the idea that regardless of what I do and how much effort I put in, it's never going to be good enough for him.
Yeah. So were you looked at by him as a problem, something that he had to control? Was that pretty much the way he looked at you?
Yeah, very much so. He knew I was very smart, very intellectual, very just I've always loved learning. And he thought that he was going to be able to take that and mold me into something. And I have never been moldable, which is part of the reason I made it through the TTI. But that ended up causing a lot of clashes between us.
Yeah. And you went through a few wilderness programs, is that correct?
Yeah. I went to the summer of 2003, I spent at a wilderness program in Minnesota called Soul Treks. I'm not sure. I don't think I've ever come across another survivor who's actually heard of it. And then that December, 3 days before Christmas, I was gooned, which is the survivor term for being picked up by a juvenile transport company. Usually in the middle of the night, taken out of your bed, strip searched, and then taken out of the house, sometimes in handcuffs, sometimes not, and then usually flown out of state to whatever program they're taking you to.
Were you taken out in handcuffs?
Yes.
And why the handcuffs? They're just afraid you're going to be hard to handle?
Well, that's part of the reason that they pick you up in the middle of the night when you're sleeping, and also why they encourage parents to give medications to their children that will induce some level of exhaustion or sedative effect, and the goal is for them to catch you off guard so that you can't even fight or run.
Sounds kind of like the strategy the SWAT teams do. You know, they come in the middle of the night,
Hmm.
go to
That's
bed.
exactly what they do.
Yeah. And that sounds very traumatizing, I'm
It
sure.
is.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest part of the trauma that I still have and deal with, is the sleep issues from, expecting that somebody's going to come kidnap me and, traffic me across state lines.
Yeah. Do you have nightmares about it?
Sometimes, usually in the winter is usually when they're bad. Snow is also a trigger because my second wilderness program, I spent in a week-long record-breaking blizzard for the state that actually has its own Wikipedia page.
Hmm. Now, were you abused a lot in the wilderness programs? Was that an
It
abuse?
was, for me, it was a lot more neglect because we got stranded in a blizzard. We couldn't get out. Nobody could get to us. We ran out of food. We ran out of water. But the way that the programs work is a lot of them have like step systems or phase systems, or point systems. They're all kind of centered around this like task based, like you have to complete these tasks to earn these privileges. Um, but
Keep your room clean and go to class on time and things like that?
well, the in wilderness, the first thing you had to do was carve a spoon out of a stick, and the privilege you earned from that was food.
Really?
And then once you had done that, then you had to collect the pieces to build what's called a busting kit. It's a kit to start a fire with a bow drill. Um, and so you have to collect pieces for that, carve everything, and then actually prove to them that you can make fire with it. And the privilege you get then is access to fire, and cooked hot food. So until you do that, you're eating like vacuum sealed packets of tuna. When we ran out of food, the last thing I remember I ate um, was dry uncooked pinto beans because that's all that there was. And they wouldn't let me near the fire because I hadn't earned it. They wouldn't let me eat hot food, or cooked food, period. So like there was no way to warm up. And the other thing that you earned once you proved to them that you could make fire was access to the group. So until you did that, you were completely isolated. Like they kept me anywhere from like 1,000 feet to like 1,000 yards away from the rest of the group the entire time I was there.
Wow. So that's isolation, and it's supposed to make you more controllable, I suppose.
Yeah, to an extent. If the geographic isolation doesn't get you first.
So it really is literally in the wilderness, and you have to survive with survival
Mhm.
principles.
Yeah.
Did you live in tents?
We had a tarp and a piece of parachute cord that doubled as our shelter and our backpack. So you would use the tarp and the parachute cord to set up a shelter of some sort. No instruction. Nobody ever told you what to do. Nobody told you how to do it. You're just expected to just do it.
Sure.
Um, and then when we packed up camp, you'd take your tarp down, lay it out flat, put all your stuff in the middle, and then kind of roll it up into this like burrito kind of thing. And then tie it with the parachute cord, and the parachute cord acted as like the straps of your backpack, and everything was inside the tarp. Um, Again, no instruction. Nobody told you how to do any of this. And I spent the great majority of my time in wilderness actually just dragging the whole thing behind me because I couldn't do it.
Yeah. So how long did you stay in isolation before you came up with the group?
5.5 weeks. And no, I never earned access to the group because everything was under snow. So I couldn't collect anything to build my busting kit, which means I couldn't make a fire, which means I didn't ever earn access to the group.
Yeah. So I guess that whole experience in itself was traumatizing. I mean,
Mhm.
it sounds like a form of torture, like they were trying to break you. I mean, is that pretty much the way you felt?
Yeah. My favorite thing, because like, it's hard to explain this kind of stuff to people. But my favorite tool to use for that is it's a document that was written in 1956 by Albert Biderman. It's called Biderman's Chart of Coercion. And it outlines, it's basically a document that teaches the Army how to best torture prisoners of war. And I think there's seven tactics on there. Isolation is on there, exhaustion. And then there's, yeah, it's a really interesting document actually. But every single survivor I know has an experience with each and every single tactic on that list. And a time when that specific tactic was used on them.
Yeah. Did you at any point, in any way, feel like it was good for you when you went through that isolation, like it was making you better able to handle situations or life or anything?
It taught me resilience. Because I mean, especially during wilderness and especially when they told us that the company basically said, screw you, we're leaving you guys out there in the blizzard. I expected to die.
Yeah.
I spent every single day that I was there expecting to not make it to the next.
And your parents, did they know what was going on?
To an extent. My parents actually, so I got picked up and taken to wilderness December 22nd, 2003. And that same day, later that day, my parents packed up my sister and went to Mexico for Christmas. So they were completely like, the program couldn't even get a hold of them. Yeah. And so like they were gone for like the first 2 weeks I was there. And so like there was and it started snowing 3 days in. So there was no communication or anything like that. So like they knew to an extent, that they were going to put us out there in the middle of nowhere with, minimal gear and stuff. And I'm not sure that they expected the snow. But I mean, it's Utah. It happens every year and the deserts get it the worst. But I mean, I guess they knew to an extent, but the mentality that we as survivors actually spend our entire lives fighting against is, well, the biggest question we get asked actually when we say, hey, I'm a survivor of this is, well, what did you do to get yourself there? So there's very much a victim blaming mentality, well, nothing else worked. You were uncontrollable, so you deserve kind of whatever you get.
Yeah. And did you ever feel at that time that you were just a victim, or did you really feel like it was all your fault and you were no good, or how did you feel mentally and emotionally?
I mean, that's one of the tactics they use is they use the same tactics that abusers use. They break you down into nothing. And usually that starts with verbal berating and insults. But like, I spent 2 years in the industry, and for me, it was a little bit, I guess, easier because I had my dad at home and he'd been telling me all those kinds of things my whole life. So for me, it was just a change of scenery, a change of voice, and the change of the body and mouth the voice was coming out of. But like, it's very much focused on that, like, part of the mentality I think that parents have is like when your teenager is troubled, they need structure and control to the point where there is no wiggle room. The mentality that, well, you're incapable of making the right decision. So if you're even allowed to make a decision for yourself, you're going to make the wrong one. So we may as well be making all the decisions for you.
Yeah.
So like, there's already that mentality of like, nothing we do is right anyway.
Yeah. So once you got with the group, how long were you with the group?
So I was in wilderness for 5.5 weeks and I never actually gained access to the group. I never met any of the girls that I was there with. I think there were 6 others. There might've been 7. Like I have no idea even who was like, how many people were there because I was never allowed to get close enough to the group.
So you were basically in isolation the whole time you were there.
Yeah. Hmm.
Were you physically afraid of the people that were in charge of you? Did you fear they were going to physically harm you, or did they?
No, like I said, I was more concerned about the neglect, like the whole food thing. I was definitely malnourished. When it started snowing, I got what I now know is called combat stress, and I just started puking like every hour the entire time I was in wilderness until I left.
Yeah.
Um, and like they accused me of having an eating disorder. And then they started, and then we were in the blizzard, and then we ran out of food. Um, and so like it was again like I had a physical reaction to intense emotional stress, and their response was, "Well, this is your fault. This is an eating disorder. You're acting this out."
So how many adults were out there with you?
2 to 3 at any given time, and none of them I think were over 25.
And did you sleep in a tent or part by yourself, or did
Yeah.
you?
Hmm.
So you definitely were alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Staff would come by once a day and give me my food for the day. Like especially during the blizzard, because one of the things they do is they'll take your shoes at night or anytime that you're in your shelter to discourage running. And because we were stranded and all in our shelters constantly, they just took our shoes and just never gave them back. Until it was time to hike again, like 2 weeks later. So going to the bathroom, every time we had to dig our tarp out from the snow and rebuild it, that was all being done in like thin cotton socks or barefoot.
Wow. Is this
So while it wasn't, I guess, explicitly abusive, there were definitely highly abusive aspects that were implemented through neglect.
now, is this place still open?
They actually closed in June.
Were there ever any criminal charges against anybody there?
No. Mm-mm.
Is that typical of wilderness programs?
Yeah, that's typical. I think I know of maybe 4 or 5 people who've actually served any kind of jail time for anything that happens in these places.
Yeah.
They are starting to crack down on them a little bit more, but like there's a local place here that I follow their police reports because all of that's public, and I can see every time the cops get called to that program. At least once a week, there's a child on child sexual assault, and at least 2-3 times a year, there's a staff on student sexual assault. And none of them are serving any kind of jail time. And like they don't even separate the kids. They're just like, okay, well, we filed the report. You guys get along. You're still roommates.
And that just sounds like a kind of a torture, the whole thing you just described. It's like something you expect to hear from Guantanamo Bay or something.
That's why I like the prisoner of war comparison, because there is that like actual document that
Yeah.
people get that was designed to teach how to torture other people. And that's exactly what they use on us.
And how old were you at the time?
When I got sent away, I was 16. I got sent away December 22nd, but my birthday's January 7th. So I turned 17 in wilderness. And then after wilderness, I spent a year and a half at a therapeutic boarding school in Montana and turned 18 there.
So what was the boarding school like? I imagine that had to be better.
Well, see, that's only slightly. That's kind of an interesting thing that like you brought that up, because that's something that most kids who get to long-term residential treatment centers feel when they get out of wilderness. It's like, well, at least, I've got shelter, I've got a bed I can sleep in, I've got bedding, I have food that is actually cooked. Like, it's like you get there and it's like, you're just flooded with all this, like, well, at least there's some level of normalcy. And I think it kind of it makes it easier for you to be blindsided by what comes later.
Yeah. So what did come later?
So after wilderness, I got picked up by a transport company again and taken from my wilderness program to my boarding school in northern Montana. It's about maybe 2.5 hours from the Canadian border. It's like right by Glacier. And when I got there, I went into the office, I took off my shoes, I did all the intake stuff for like maybe an hour, and then I went to put my shoes on to go back outside, and they wouldn't go on. My feet had started to swell, and within that hour, they had swelled 4 sizes. Within the next 24 hours, they swelled another 4, and stayed swollen 8 sizes for about 4 months. And their solution was, well, let's run laps on your feet, not let's go to a doctor.
Wow. And how could they say that's good for kids? I mean, that's just torture. Period.
It is. It absolutely is.
No other word for it. That's torture.
Well, again, you got here because of your bad behavior, and one of those bad behaviors often includes lying. So we're instantaneously labeled as liars and hypochondriacs, and that nothing that we say is actually true or valid. So, I mean, that's been the cause of that was the cause of both industry deaths that were both in Utah, actually, in 2022. They were medical neglect cases that the lawsuits read almost identically, except the names, where for weeks they gave kids who had serious infections that needed to be treated Motrin and water, if not just water. And just, told, you have to participate. You can't go lay in bed. There's no resting. And I know in my case, when I tried to tell my parents, I tried to say there's something wrong with my feet. And before I could even finish that sentence, the staff had hung up the phone, and called my parents and told them that I was losing phone privileges because I was trying to be manipulative to get myself out of there. And they gave me a 30-day comm ban, or a communication ban, where I wasn't allowed to communicate with anybody outside the program, which, I mean, nobody in the program had access to communicate with anybody outside the program other than the parents that sent them there and that were paying for the program.
It's as hard as I even imagine. It really is. I mean, prisoners that have actually committed serious crimes are treated much better than what you just described.
Yeah. They get medical care. They get regular food. They have nutrition. They have exercise time that's not forced.
Yeah.
And they get paid for the jobs that they do.
Yeah.
Even if it's minimal, I mean, they still get paid for it. Like, they've got the difference between the TTI and any other kind of incarceration or corrections or residential treatment is that you have no rights. There is no laws that govern the industry in a way that gives us rights in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. So you stayed in the boarding school until you were 18?
18 and a half, yeah. The first time they let me go home on a home visit, I packed a bag in the middle of the night and I ran away, and I hitchhiked as far as I could up the coast of California and didn't call my family for 6 months.
Well, once you turned 18, weren't you allowed to legally leave?
I didn't know that until after I'd turned 20.
Wow. So you thought you were on the run from the law for a couple of years?
Yeah.
And you weren't. I mean, you weren't really done anything wrong.
Mm-mm. No, because really what got me sent away was the behaviors that I developed to try to manage my prior trauma, plus the narcissistic abuse I was getting from my dad. And that actually only manifested in smoking weed and minor self-harm. Like, that's what got me sent away.
Yeah.
And that's very common.
I look back on my childhood and teenage years, I definitely qualified for that kind of program, and I'm glad they didn't exist back then, or if they did, my parents didn't know about it, or but that's horrible. So once you found out you didn't have, you were legal, you were free, what did you do with your life? I mean, how did it take you? How did you make it through all that trauma? I mean, I'm
Well,
sure you had it completely,
so
but
within a week of running away, I ran into my son's dad, or who is now my son's dad. Um, and he ended up being a raging hardcore alcoholic. By the time he left, or by the time I kicked him out, he was drinking 10 to 12 40-ounce bottles of beer a day, every day. And then he'd black out and get abusive, physically, mentally, like in every way, shape, and form. And finally I was like, I've had enough. And really that's another common thing for survivors, is to get into those domestic violence relationships, because to us that is love. That's the only thing anybody in our lives has ever shown us, as some level of care, because that's what the programs do. I mean, um, they mask everything they're doing as care.
yeah. And you probably got a lot more attention than you did in obviously the wilderness program.
Yeah.
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 So how did you get to the point you're at now? You currently do activism and you're the project manager of graphic designer of Surviving Abuse podcast.
Yeah, we're actually about to launch a new podcast that's about the TTI, called Surviving the Troubled Teen Industry. I'm going to be hosting that under the Surviving Network, which I'm super excited about. Um, I don't know. I'm kind of a master of many trades, if that makes sense. Like, I started getting involved in the activism actually during a creative writing course for college, when I was like, maybe I'm ready to write about this a little bit.
Yeah.
And then after that, I was like, I can connect at least one assignment in every class that I take to this topic in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And now it's just turned into kind of a challenge to see just how many, like, if I can make it every single assignment in a course relate to this in some way. And then I had so much writing that I had done on the topic, like all kinds of stuff, like memoirs and journalistic stuff and investigative stuff, and like all kinds of things, like survivor interviews. And I got sick of sharing Google Docs, so I made a website, which I'm like shocked that I got this domain, but it is thetroubledteenindustry.com. And I threw all the work that I've done in this up there. I started posting that to places like, other social medias like Reddit. And through that, I ended up starting a Discord channel about a year ago for survivors and allies, that now has over 200 people in it. It's really an incredible support system for survivors, where they feel safe. And through that, I've had a number of people who are in that Discord connect me with other people, other survivors, former staff, parents, either parents who are looking for programs for their kids, or for parents who kind of recognize that they were complicit in the abuse of their own kids. And my goal is to basically give all of those different groups a safe space to voice their feelings about, anything that's involved with the concept of teens being troubled, because they're in a state of psychological crisis and they're in survival mode.
Yeah.
It's not, most people look at teenagers and they're like, oh, they're acting out. Their bad behavior is all intentional. They're doing this on purpose just to piss me off. And that's really not the case at all.
It's a lot of pain, a lot of hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like to say, kids don't get in these places because they're happy and well-adjusted, and have ideal parenting. They get in these places because they have prior trauma and they have parents who don't know how to adapt their parenting style to a child in crisis.
Yeah. So did you feel like you were kind of healing in a way before you got into college studying psychology, or has that helped you to have some kind of healing process?
Well, I went into psychology initially because I wanted to be a criminal profiler. I wanted to work in behavioral science. And so actually I'm working on a psychology degree, but about half of my courses were actually criminal justice courses. And then I got into the activism stuff. And the more that I work with survivors and the more that like in Utah, I called 121 therapists, and every single one of them, their response when I said, I want to work on TTI trauma was trauma. What trauma? Those places work. You just didn't do the work. 121 people in the state of Utah, professionals. And finally, a friend sent me this video about a year ago with this incredible band that's local called Citizen Soldier. And their band was formed by a former TTI staff after a failed suicide attempt. And all their music is just like mental health based and recovery based. And like, you know, it's relatable for people who struggle. And it took me about a year of listening to their music constantly, sharing their profiles, sharing their socials, sharing their links and everything, and looking at their bio everywhere, which is always, it's the same thing on all their socials and everything. So I've seen it thousands of times, but it took about a year for the line that says they're based in Salt Lake and the line that says he is now a clinical or I can't remember what it is, psychotherapist, something like that. Can't remember what word they used, but for them to like come together and me be like, wait a minute, this guy's a local therapist who might not gaslight me. And he was able to connect me with somebody he works with. And like, we just started working on like the prep work to start EMDR. And I just had my fourth visit with her yesterday. And this is the first time that I've ever actually sought and or engaged in any kind of professional mental health care since I left my program.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have healed largely? Or?
I do. And the activism, it helps a lot. One thing that I've just been completely in awe of and just like, it makes me really happy is that newer survivors, the ones who got out of their programs between like 2018 and now, they're coming out just like, because a lot of us older survivors, it took us years, if not decades, to even recognize that like the abusive tactics and the fact that, yeah, we were abused there and this is all horrendous. And these new kids are all coming out like with that knowledge, like already, and like knowing that there's a community out there for them. And like, it's really refreshing to see so many, kids in their very young 20s who have been significantly traumatized, doing things like getting jobs and succeeding at college and doing all the things that took me, 20 years to do. But they're doing it, 2, 3, 4 years after they get out of their programs.
Yeah.
Which is, and I think we have to credit a lot of that to the survivor community and the fact that we've built this safe place for survivors to come right off the bat. Those places are very isolating in every way, shape, and form.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of things one of the things that they do is they will reward snitches for telling on other girls who do things wrong.
Yeah.
And if you don't snitch and they find out you knew, you're getting in trouble too. And so is the entire group. And that's going to be your fault. So it's incredibly isolating and like detaching from your peers in your community.
Yeah.
And just the fact that these kids who are coming out of these programs now have a survivor community to go to is just incredible. I think it's, like this, we've had people who are trying to get legislation passed back in the 80s about this stuff. So this is not like a new fight or a new movement or anything. Paris Hilton just gave it kind of a new life.
Yeah.
Um, she brought enough attention to it that people looked at her and were able to say, wait a minute, maybe there's some truth to this. Maybe survivors are worth listening to. And that's, and that's what most survivors do is, they're out there, they're telling their stories on social media and podcasts and, documentaries and all kinds of stuff. Like there's so many projects in the works in the survivor community in so many different ways. Like I've got my website and my podcasts and, and the Discord server. That's kind of what I'm working on. Which after working with that group of people, I completely changed my educational trajectory. I dropped all of the criminal justice classes I was signed up for. I stacked everything with psych. And my goal now is to be a therapist for specifically for troubled teen industry survivors and adoptees. I want to take the concept of trauma-informed care a step further into trauma-lived care, because I think healing can happen a lot faster, a lot more readily, and you can feel a lot safer doing it when you know that the person you're talking to has been through exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And that means a great deal to any client to know you're talking to somebody that has been there.
Right. Right. And I think that's, something like there's the stigma of mental illness and especially around professionals with mental illness. And so I think we're as a society just getting to a point where something like trauma lived care is even feasible. Because now, it's okay to be a mental health professional with mental health issues.
Yeah.
And I think there's just such a power in not having to explain that your trauma was trauma and then explain how it was traumatic. Like you get to skip all of that beginning stuff and just like get down to it, because you don't have to convince anybody of anything, because the person who's sitting there wholeheartedly believes you.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I went to my first AA meeting when I was 28 years old, and I was amazed at the people that had been through the things that I was experiencing and feeling.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for them teaching me from their own experience and saying, this is what I did to get over this, and giving me that kind of love and support and, training, I would have never made it.
Yeah.
Thanks to people like that, I can now say gratefully, I won't say it with pride, but gratefully that I've been clean and sober for almost 39 years.
Good. That's something like that community aspect of understanding is so incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And that's something that TTI survivors didn't ever have until very, very recently. There was no support system. There was no community. There was nothing. We're all kind of on our own, believing that we're the only ones who didn't get fixed by the program.
Yeah. But I have a whole lot more respect for somebody that's been through it and helping other people get out of it than somebody that just read a book or took a course on it,
Right.
And if it's somebody that has both, then that person can be helpful. So I'm sure you can do a lot of help, and probably are already, I imagine, right?
Yep.
Good. So anything that you would like to say to people maybe watching that may be getting ready to be in the troubled teen industry or getting ready to send kids into it? What advice would you give?
I think the biggest message is for parents. Passive parenting doesn't really work. And it takes a lot of work to get to the point before your kids are teenagers. I think the most important thing that you can do as a parent, the most absolutely necessary thing, is to make your home and yourself an unconditional safe place for your kids. That no matter how bad they mess up outside of you, your family, and your house, they're always going to have somewhere and somebody safe to come home to.
Yeah. Do you feel like are you bitter in any way about everything that's happened to you?
I was for a really long time.
Yeah.
I think at some point and I think a lot of people do, you just get to the point where you're just like, this is exhausting.
Yeah.
Like, why am I putting all this effort into, focusing on the negative side of things when I can look at this and be like, hey, I've got a really unique experience here that very few people can relate to,
Yeah.
but the people that can relate to it need that.
Yeah. Well, I certainly admire your courage for coming as far as you have and for being willing to help other people that are going through it or might go through it. Do you want to share any information about websites or how people can contact you?
Yeah, just my main website is thetroubledteenindustry.com. And that has all my socials on it. It's got tons of information about the industry. It's got survivor accounts. It's got letters to parents who might be looking at the programs. It's got a lot of educational background stuff. And it's got some more like investigative type things. And,
Yeah.
I kind of have done a lot, like in a lot of different places with it. It's always a constant work in progress, but I want it to be the kind of resource that people can go to and know that they're not alone.
Yeah. Very good. And is there anything else you want to say that I haven't given you an opportunity to say?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on, Nora. I do appreciate it. And feel free to share this with anybody you want to. And I admire what you're doing. Thank you for being here. And folks that are watching and listening, thanks for tuning in to Friday Night Conversations. And we are very, very grateful for Nora coming out tonight and wish you all the best in what you do. And say good night.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye. Thanks everyone for tuning in to Friday Night Conversations. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.